The pediatrician sent us for blood work because she couldn't quite get to the bottom of what was going on. And she called the next day and told me that Will likely had leukemia and that the team at Children's was waiting for us and to get in the car and head straight there. And that's really where this part of the journey began.
Each one of us has a story. It's being written in moments of both joy and pain, in life's triumphs and its tragedies. It holds the power to inspire, to deliver hope, to bring change, but only if we will use the power of a voice.
Claudia, I always say everybody has a story, and I'm going to cry because you have a sad story. So start from the beginning. You're a mom. You have 3 kids?
I have three boys.
And the ages are?
So my eldest is 21, and then the middle is, my eldest is Stothy, 21. The middle is Jack. He's 19, and then I have Will, who would be 17 right now, and he would be a senior in high school.
So tell me your story.
So my story, or at least this portion of my story.
A page in life.
A page in life, exactly. It started on December 18th of 2018. And my youngest son, Will, at the time he had just turned 14. Mm-hmm. We had just gotten back from a family vacation to San Diego. The 3 boys were just doing their normal beach stuff, volleyball and football and surfing. And
my kind of vacation.
That's right. That's my kind of vacation, too. And we came back, home, and right after we got home, Will started to feel a little off. Nothing really concerning, but just off and on, off and on. And I eventually did take him in to see the pediatrician because it was just very unlike him to be sickly at all. Mm-hmm. He was a very healthy, strong kid. All of my boys were and are. And the pediatrician sent us for blood work because she couldn't quite get to the bottom of what was going on. And she called the next day and told me that Will likely had leukemia and that the team at Children's was waiting for us and to get in the car and head straight there. And that's really where this part of the journey began.
Can we back up a little bit? What kind of symptoms did he have? So
the symptoms were were really quite mild. He was just a little fatigued, and then he would feel okay. And then a couple of days later, he would just be a little off again. So it really just seemed like a virus. And then eventually what really concerned me was he had some swelling in his face that was really odd. And that's kind of what prompted me to take him into the pediatrician because typically my boys were healthy and I was the mom who just said, it's a virus, it'll be fine, just move on. And this was a little different, obviously. So, but the symptoms were pretty nonspecific. And that's typically the case in a cancer diagnosis.
And you say to Will, hey, let's get into the car.
Yes. Well, Will, he knew something was going on. And he said, Mom, what's going on? And he was at home that day from school because he wasn't feeling well. And so I told him, Will was, and I always speak of him in the present tense.
He's here.
He's still here with me. He was an incredibly intelligent and tuned-in human being. And so he knew something was going on. And he, he said, Mom, because he heard me take the call from the pediatrician. And he just said, Mom, what's going on? And I told him, I said, Will, you have leukemia. And we are going to Children's. And we got in the car and we made the drive to Children's. Incredibly, even after raising 3 boys who were all athletes and rambunctious and all of that, that was the first time I had ever made a trip to Children's Hospital. The first time. So Will and I got in the car and we talked, and he asked me if I thought that they would let him wear a hat when he went back to school, because he knew he would have to do chemo, and he was thinking about losing his hair. He had this
In the car ride
Yeah.
to the hospital.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's just what we talked about. And, internally I was certainly,
Throwing up.
I was definitely feeling a lot of emotion. But I remember thinking to myself, okay, it's leukemia. That can be treated. Kids get better. So even though there was a panic and, it was very, very concerning, I truly thought that all would be well.
Were you familiar with the word leukemia prior?
Yeah, I knew a little bit about it. I think like most families, we had maybe contact with another family who had gone through a similar diagnosis. But we always, like most people, kind of thought, well, this is something that happens to other people. And you would hear about another family with a child perhaps going through a cancer diagnosis, but there was always a sense of...
Not me.
Not me. And I think that's very common. You would step up, you would bring them a meal, you would donate, you would do whatever was needed, but there was this sort of buffer. And so I knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know very much. So on the car ride, we were fairly calm, and Will certainly wasn't feeling great, but he was taking it in stride. And parked the car, and we walked through the doors of Children's Hospital, Colorado, and we didn't leave for 6 months. So I had no idea what was going to happen. What rolled out in the following 6 months was quite different than I had ever imagined anything could be. So
You're taken to where as you walked through the doors?
So we went through the emergency room because that's where they admit you, and then they took us in to run further tests. So the diagnosis had to be confirmed. And what we then immediately learned was that there are different kinds of leukemia. And typically a childhood cancer diagnosis, a leukemia diagnosis is ALL, which is acute lymphatic or something like that, leukemia. I'm losing the word right now. And that one is the more common and more treatable form of childhood leukemia. Will's, however, was AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia. Much more aggressive, less common in young cancer patients, but certainly is diagnosed, within the young cancer population. So that was right off the bat what they had to determine was which kind of leukemia he had. And so from there, they admitted us up to the 7th floor at Children's Hospital, and he kind of went downhill quickly. I think he was his body was so strong, and he was trying to stay strong. And then once we were admitted, it really fell apart quickly.
Fell apart as in emotionally?
No, actually, physically.
Wow.
So another part of his diagnosis, which made it even more complicated, was that his cancer was so advanced that it had affected his pituitary gland. So it was in his spinal fluid. And so it had affected his pituitary gland, and he then had the further diagnosis of diabetes insipidus. So this is a different kind of diabetes that we typically think of, but it affects the kidneys. And so he was, unbeknownst to me, for many months leading up to his diagnosis, was urinating a lot. But he, because he was 13 and then 14, was just taking care of it. He was just drinking more water. And I didn't know because he was at school. And, we live in Colorado and he's an athlete. So, I mean, it didn't cause anything. It didn't ring any bells for me.
When you walk into the room.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the emotion.
Yeah.
As a mom,
yeah.
The adrenaline or the tears?
For me, honestly, I just went into kind of true mom mode of like, okay, what do we need to do? Mm-hmm. Try to keep him feeling like he was being taken care of. The diabetes insipidus, because it requires constant hydration, what happened was when he was admitted, they had to send him in for a CT scan, and so they had to withhold liquid. And it kind of caused his body to just shut down. And so they were really scrambling to figure out what was going on. He was in a really bad state. It went from Will wasn't feeling very well, we check into Children's, they admit him to the 7th floor, to we need to figure out what is actually going on. And so his body just shut down.
And his emotions?
And his emotions, he was hollering. He was angry because he was so thirsty. Oh. So if you can imagine, you're urinating, you're losing all of the hydration and the balance of all the sodium and electrolytes in your body. So he actually was feeling horrible, and so he was hollering. He was screaming bloody murder to the doctor and to the nurses because he wanted to drink some water. So it's almost akin to, if you can imagine being on a desert island and not having access to water, and then seeing the water and not being able to drink it. So he really was super focused on that. And I was just trying to keep him calm. And we got through it. And then eventually they were able to get him what he needed and they stabilized him. But it was just, part of the process of determining the full diagnosis. And so emotion was, I think I was just stunned. I think I was in shock. And I think because things got desperate so quickly, I just did what I needed to do to keep him calm, to keep myself calm. And I just went into, like I said before, like mom mode, where you just do what you have to do.
And your 6 weeks stay, 6 months?
6 months.
Okay.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah. So with acute myeloid leukemia, the treatment is very, very intense. And the chemos that they administer basically bring the immune system down to 0. And so that floor at Children's, the 7th floor, is actually has a special HVAC system as well. So kids and teens and young adults who are treated there, and especially with AML, they have to be particularly careful about infection. Because their immune function is 0, they just have 0 ability to fight off any infection. So that could be a common cold, it could be mold, it could be fungus. So they have to be really, really careful. So typically the course is, a kid with AML, they take the chemo, and then they're in the hospital until their immune function recovers. And that can take, a good 4 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So 4 weeks to recover and to get their immune system back where they can then leave the hospital. And so because Will's diagnosis was so aggressive, he didn't respond to any of the treatments. And the subtype that he had, so I'll back up a little. in a childhood AML diagnosis, it really is a complex set of diseases. So it's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. And right now, and especially when Will was being treated, the diagnosis, or the treatment rather, is kind of a one-size-fits-all. So what they normally do for AML patients was not working at all for Will. And so he pretty much just stayed in the hospital because they had to move very quickly into the next round of chemo. And then they moved into 2 rounds of a clinical trial because nothing else was working. And so his treatment schedule was more condensed and more aggressive, even though in general the treatment for AML is very aggressive.
Was he able to have visitors?
Yes, he was. Yeah. So his friends would come. His brothers were just constantly coming and bringing him whatever he needed.
And he says to his friends, I have
Cancer, leukemia.
And his friends respond, are you going to get better?
I think they probably all thought he would be okay. I don't know that they talked about that a lot. I think that, like me, going into it and what little most people know about leukemia, there are a lot of success stories. And so I think they figured he would be okay. But they saw him going through horribly intense treatments, and they certainly saw the suffering.
Did he suffer?
And he suffered greatly. Yeah. Yep.
Your other 2 boys?
Yeah. They were there. They were there, right by his side.
Feeling his pain?
Absolutely.
Scared that they would have that same issue?
I don't think so. So childhood cancer is a very random diagnosis typically. So, we don't have cancer in our family. It typically is the result of just that rapidly changing dividing cell in the body. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not even going to pretend to go into the scientific details.
Because I'm not either.
But generally it is just, as Will's doctors told me when he was diagnosed, it's just bad luck. So his brothers, I don't think, were hyper concerned about themselves. And like brothers do, they tried to just kind of keep his spirits up. They didn't cut him much slack. I know in their heart of hearts, they were very worried and it was very hard for them, but they continued on like brothers do.
Yeah.
And just tried to keep everything, quote unquote, normal, because that's what Will wanted. He never wanted to be looked at as the cancer kid. Mm-hmm. He wanted to just get through this and move on and get back to his regular life of just being a teenage boy. And so I think generally that was the approach that everyone took in terms of interacting with him. Not because we weren't completely open and honest about it, but just because that was the best way forward for us. Mm-hmm. Will never once said, why me? He didn't complain. He didn't question.
Did you say that?
I did. I actually wrote about it. During the process of Will being in treatment, I started to write. And it started as just a way to keep people informed about what was going on. And kind of quickly took on a life of its own. And I do remember writing, and I truly felt this and do continue to feel this way. Why not us? Why not us? Because this happens every single day in this country, in the world. I mean, but just in this country alone, the average is about 46 kids a day get diagnosed with cancer. 46. Yep. And we're talking, from newborns all the way up to 19 is what's considered pediatric cancer. But, young people in their 20s and 30s are being diagnosed. So why not us? Why not us? So, and Will was very, very involved in his treatment.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. So as I said before, he was a really very intelligent and sharp kid, stubborn, and
You say that stubborn.
so stubborn. I mean, anyone that knows Will knows that kid was stubborn as a mule and basically took no prisoners. Like he was all in his treatment. And so when the doctors would round every day in the morning with, the latest blood results or whatever it was that they needed to talk about and discuss, Will said, I don't want you to round outside in the hallway. I want you to come in my room and I want to know what's going on. And he would listen. Mm-hmm. He would email his oncologist at Children's and say, I have some questions for you and I would like to have a meeting.
He was an old soul.
He was an old soul, 100%. Yep. So he was very involved and he was eyes wide open. He knew what was at stake. He knew that this was not going as planned. Mm-hmm. He knew very, very acutely that things were very tricky in his case.
So why the 6-month stay, and why did he go home after 6 months?
Yes. As I said, his treatment schedule was more condensed. Yep. The last round of chemo that he did, it was the second round of a clinical trial. That was really just a Hail Mary. We were just trying anything and everything we could to knock the amount of leukemia down in his body so that he could be eligible for a bone marrow transplant. And so the bone marrow transplant was really the only quote-unquote curative option for Will. Fortunately, both of his brothers were perfect matches. And so, behind the scenes, they did all the testing and they had decided that Stathi, his oldest brother, would be the donor. Mm-hmm. So it was really, we had everything lined up, which is very fortunate because one of the challenges with a lot of AML patients is that they do require a bone marrow transplant for a true treatment, and they don't have a donor. Or they don't have a good donor. So we were very fortunate. We had 2 perfect donors who were, wrestling to say who gets to do it, right? And but they do require there to be either no leukemia present in the bone marrow of the patient or at least a very, very small percentage. And so the second round of the clinical trial for Will, again, Hail Mary, and we really just didn't know if it would work. And I'll never forget the day the doctors and his care team walked in to let us know that he could.
Wow.
Yeah. I get emotional because I think about, I remember that day so well, and I remember his doctors and nurses and the PAs, they all came in and they were all crying, wow. Which was, I think, a testament to how much they cared for Will, and they were just couldn't believe that the result was that he could go forward with a bone marrow transplant. But again, because his leukemia was so aggressive, they had to really condense the timeline. And so typically a patient would go home for a little while and recover. The chemo for bone marrow transplant, the prep chemo for that, makes the rest of the chemo look like child's play.
Whoa.
It is, unless you see it with your own eyes, you really can't even believe it. So we had to roll right into that chemo. And Will handled it. They were really, really concerned. There were a lot of potential complications. We moved into the care of the bone marrow transplant team, and Will's doctor there was, very upfront about the many things that he would be watching for, and most of them life-threatening. And somehow Will kind of got through that bone marrow transplant chemo like just like a true warrior. Like it was hard, but he did it. And then his brother Stathi came in, swooped in, donated a ton of bone marrow, and the transplant happened, and then we just waited. And you stay in the hospital. The bone marrow transplant, which, prior to this, I had no idea what to expect. They take the marrow from the donor and they clean it up, and then they infuse it into, Will had a port and, a direct line into his heart, and the chemo for the bone marrow just wipes out everything in your marrow, and then they infuse the patient with the new marrow, and it starts to take over, and the hope is that it basically creates a whole new system in the patient, and then no more leukemia, right? So we just waited, and there were some pretty dark days there because the effects of the chemo, horrible mouth sores all the way down the digestive system, fatigue, nausea, weakness, bone pain, neuropathy, and this is a 14-year-old boy who before this was an athlete, healthy, strong. And, he went from a typical teenage boy to someone who was really fighting for his life and dealing with side effects that are so intense that, again, unless you see it with your own eyes, you really can't believe it. I remember one time Will, he said that, which is really funny and kind of speaks to Will's, just his brain and a sense of humor. He said the bone pain, and from what I understand, bone pain is exceedingly hard to treat, and it's incredibly painful. It's a very deep, deep pain. And so even though Will had so many pain meds on board, it wasn't even touching the bone pain. And he said to me, it feels like I've been Nancy Kerrigan. Which what he meant was, that someone was whacking him with a metal pole, which is really funny because Will was born in 2004, but he knew all about that. So anyway, he had a great sense of humor, dark but good. He was a sharp kid. So anyway, we made it through all of that, and he walked out of Children's Hospital on May 28th and came home to recover. So that was a really good day. We did not think that we'd get there, and we did.
And then what happened?
And then spent the next handful of months at home recovering. Recovery from a bone marrow transplant is pretty intense. And so this is all pre-COVID. But we were living the COVID life before COVID was even a twinkle in someone's eye, right? I mean, he had the very heavy-duty mask. He couldn't go outside he had to wear a mask outside. If anyone came to the house, they had to wear a mask. We had to remove all the house plants because the dirt in a house plant might carry a mold. Wow. And if a spore was introduced to Will, then that could actually be something that could be fatal to him. As his immune system got stronger and he started to get a little stronger, we started to relax a little bit. Recovery included, 3 times a week trips to the clinic at Children's for blood work and meeting with his doctors. And things were starting to look promising. We knew, again, that his cancer had a pretty high chance of returning, but he seemed to be defying the odds.
Why? Why would it return? Because
of the type of leukemia. Even though the best treatment is a bone marrow transplant, it is not a slam dunk, and there really isn't a quote unquote cure. So,
what's eating his marrow?
So basically what's happening, and that's a great question. And again, I'm not a scientist. And so if there's any
layman.
If there's any doctor or scientist watching this, they'll probably be like, what is she talking about? But I'll explain to you as I understand it. So your bone marrow is responsible for producing all of your blood cells and all of that good stuff, right? And in AML, basically the marrow is churning out what they call blasts. And blasts are immature cells that crowd out the healthy cells. And so, I don't understand the why, but because he went into the bone marrow transplant with a small amount of disease, that actually raised his chance of a relapse a little bit more. But again, when you're going through treatment, you just do what's available, right? And you do what's needed to to try and treat the leukemia. But there's always a chance that it'll come back. The goal, of course, is to replace the unhealthy marrow with the healthy marrow. But there's always going to be a couple of cells left over that they want to start multiplying, and those are the unhealthy cells, and that's exactly what happened with Will. So
you're making trips to children's?
Yes. So a big milestone for a bone marrow transplant patient is the 100-day mark. You make it to 100 days, they start talking about taking your port out. So again, Will had what's called a Broviac, and that is it's into your body, right? And it is 2 lumens, so 2 kind of channels for medication. And at 100 days, they say, we can take that out as long as everything looks good. And he was counting down. I mean, he couldn't stand that port because, again, behind the scenes, that requires daily care, flushing it out, which I did, changing the caps, changing the dressing. He couldn't get it wet, so he had to cover it with saran wrap every time he took a shower. He couldn't go swimming. He couldn't do anything, really. So he was really looking forward to getting that thing out. He hated that thing, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And it was about, day 95, and we went in for just a normal clinic visit, and they took his blood work, and the clinic was backed up, so they said, just go home, we'll call you, let you know everything's fine. And the phone rang, and I knew something was wrong because his oncologist was back on the line, and they said his cancer was back.
So now what?
So, of course, Will's sitting right there, and he said, what's going on? And I told him. So Will's, one of his things, and he said it from when he was just a little guy, he would say, don't sugarcoat it. Don't sugarcoat it. And so I never did. I just told him. And I said, well, your cancer's back. And, we had a little moment, and he's like, all right. And we just said, all right, we'll just have to do what's next, right? We're gonna tackle the next thing. And we went back to Children's, and they did the full workup. They did another bone marrow biopsy. So Will had a line of scars on the back of his hips, where they had taken bone marrow to sample it for the biopsies. And so we went in for another, and sure enough, they confirmed that it was back. And we met with his oncologist, and she was telling him, this is what we'll try. And he said, nope, time out. I'm not doing this. I want to go to high school. So we got that call the day school started in Douglas County. And all that kid wanted to do was go to high school. So he said, I want to go to high school for a bit. I want to be a normal kid. I want to go to football games. I want to get to homecoming. I want to take a girl to homecoming. He was 14. And so I said, Kelly, that's his oncologist, he's not going to back down. So let's figure this out. And she did. And so she figured out a way to keep his leukemia kind of tamped down enough where he could start school. So the silver lining was, because he was no longer a bone marrow transplant patient, he could kind of go back to more of a normal life, and so he could start school. And so he did. He started his freshman year at Highlands Ranch High School and jumped right in and did all the things. He went to football games. He took a girl to homecoming. He
proud moment.
Yes, exactly. Looking very dapper, I might add. He did what he wanted to do. We went to the White House for his Make-A-Wish trip, and that was amazing. Yes.
How exciting.
Yes, yeah. We got to meet the president and hang out in the Oval Office, which was pretty cool.
Did he sit in the president's chair?
He didn't do that. Yeah.
His personality.
Yeah. Right? Exactly. Like, Mr. President, step aside. I'm going to just sit here for a minute. Yeah, in fact, you're right. I wish he had done that. But we got to do some good, just family things. Obviously, all the while behind the scenes, there was a lot of care. There were blood transfusions, platelet transfusions on a very regular basis just to keep him going. But again, stubborn as a mule, that kid was not going to be back to be admitted until he was ready. And it was really important for him to do those things. And the only deal was his oncologist said, I get the final word. So if I get to where I need you back, you're coming back. And he's like, deal. So she made the call, and he was admitted. Unfortunately, it was after fall break and all of that, and he was admitted, and he started what's called salvage chemo, basically just trying to knock down the leukemia enough that we could have some time to find another option, because really at that point there were no options. And I knew that, and Will knew that. And his oncologist, scoured resources, met with other AML experts, as did I, just trying to figure out if there was something we could try. Because at that point, you'll try anything, right? Because that's just all you have. And there just wasn't anything. There was nothing to try. We were out of options. And so eventually it just became clear that the salvage chemo just wasn't working anymore. And we went in and had a meeting with his oncologist, and she told him that, there just unfortunately wasn't anything left to do. He was too young for an upcoming clinical trial. And so he made the decision to come home and be on hospice care. And that's what we did. And during that meeting with the oncologist, it was Will and myself and Dr. Maloney, he said, I haven't done anything yet. And I said, excuse me.
There's no need to be excused.
I said, that's where you're wrong.
When he came home, how long did you have?
So we had another, about 7 weeks at home. Acute cancers move very quickly. And so he did really pretty well. Being at home was a big deal for him, because he could be in his space. And, we just made the best of every day.
What did he say that he wanted you to know?
Well, I think most people who know Will and know me know that he's my mini-me, and he and I were like this. And so we were able to have some pretty special conversations about our relationship, about
I'm going to cry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. And I look at that as a gift. quite honestly.
It is.
It is. Because, parents don't often get to have those kind of conversations with their children, ever. And especially not at an end-of-life situation. So Will and I logged a lot of time together. He logged a lot of time with his brothers, with his dad, with his dog. He had a little corgi puppy. And so Stokely, his corgi, was constant at his side. But there were a couple of things that Will said to me that stay with me to this day. One of which is, he said, "Mom, I'm not scared."
He definitely was here before and was meant to have this experience to share maybe with you to carry on.
That's right. Yeah. He said, "I'm not scared." And he said, "I just want to make sure that you guys are okay." That's what he said to me. He was 14
and did he
at the time.
ask you if you were scared?
He didn't. I don't think I think he knew I wasn't. He and I we had sort of this bond of just knowing, And he also, because he was so involved in his treatment, he became pretty fired up about the lack of research for childhood cancer, and particularly certain childhood cancers like his. He had started a T-shirt business while he was in the hospital, and he was selling T-shirts, and then he was donating
to his roommates, right?
Yeah, and then he was. He actually he had an online business, the whole thing, and he was donating proceeds to childhood cancer charities. And so when he was in hospice, one of the things that he and I talked about, was that he did want to try to make a difference for other kids like him, so that they would have a fighting chance to get through their diagnosis. And so I just took that to heart, and he kind of handed the torch over to me, and I took it. And when he died, February 18th of 2020, he was 15 years old. I just knew what I had to do.
And peacefully, you took it over?
Yeah. Seeing someone at the end of their life is pretty transformative, and especially when it's your son. By then he was in a hospital bed in our family room, and he was unconscious for the last probably, 12 to 24 hours of his life. But I was with him, and I said goodbye to him, and I just knew. I knew that this is something that I could do to keep his memory alive. Because, again, he was worried that he hadn't had a chance to do anything.
But he did.
Right. And he had hopes and dreams just like every other kid his age. He was here, and then he wasn't.
So tell me about his foundation.
So, again, I just right away knew, okay, I have to do something. And I did not know what that was going to look like. Prior to Will being diagnosed, was a yoga instructor. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And this is just the starting point, right? And so we created the Will Strong Cancer Foundation, and immediately set up the nonprofit status. And when Will passed away, I asked for donations to the foundation. I didn't even really know what that was going to be. I just knew that this was a moment in time, an inflection point where I could start to step into something for Will and for other kids like him. And, right away just started figuring things out. I had some help, obviously, from friends and family. And
he's pulling you.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So when I had my stroke,
Yes.
I couldn't speak, but I was drawn, like I'm being pulled to do this. And I see him pulling you.
Yes, very much so. You said something earlier which which really you just hit the nail on the head. I've had people tell me that Will was a very old soul and that he was highly evolved, that his contract, so to speak, was to come and help put me on a path where I could help others.
And help him help others.
That's right.
Through you.
That's right. So really what we do is we honor Will's wish, which was to help other young cancer patients have a fighting chance to get through their diagnosis and to move on and get back to living. And that was truly his wish.
Do you tell his story to other kids?
I haven't really had a chance to do so. So right when Will died, we had his funeral at the end of the end of February, rather. And it was incredible. He, of course, wanted a proper funeral. And he had one.
Yeah.
We did it at
What
the
was
Greek.
proper,
Yeah,
right?
he wanted like the works, which I thought was actually pretty. It was
The
very
old
Will,
soul. Yeah.
the old soul. And so we had his service at the cathedral, the big Greek cathedral on Alameda. He had 2,000 people there. It was beautiful. One of still the most beautiful things I've ever been a part of in my entire life. Then a few weeks later, the world shut down with COVID. And so really with that, I didn't have access to Children's Hospital Colorado in terms of going inpatient and working with other kids. But I know that, I knew that I really wanted to focus on supporting research. And the lack of research for childhood cancer is concerning. And it's something that I didn't know much about, but I was able to surround myself with people and mentors and advocates who could get me up to speed on the realities and what was needed. And, I was quickly aligned with the Children's Hospital Colorado Foundation, and we work together now very closely to identify ways that a foundation like Will Strong can be impactful. And so, we're homegrown and we're just kind of chugging along and raising money and working with the team at Children's and trying to make sure that what we do has the greatest impact. And so fortunately, the relationship with those guys at Children's allows us to make direct donations. And
to the families or?
No. So right now, Will Strong does primarily research support. And so I work with researchers. We get proposals. There are ways where a foundation like Will Strong can fill in the gaps and be really, really helpful in unlocking large grants for researchers to continue to push forward in their work. So we've been able to find ways to step in and support so that we can continue to drive forward in that search for better treatments.
Can I ask you a favor?
Yeah.
When we're done,
Yeah.
I want you to take this video to other moms
Absolutely.
who are sitting in the hospital, and I want your sons to make a video of like the brothers, the love he had.
Yes. I would love that. In fact, I just had an event for the foundation this past weekend, and it was amazing. And his two brothers were there. They are both in college now, and of course they came and supported. And I just did a post on social media about the brothers and the bond they had, and that they will carry Will's story forward. That they will provide inspiration to others.
As you will, because it takes courage to tell this story.
Yeah. It, it's interesting. I kind of said from the beginning, obviously this isn't something I would want anyone to go through. But unfortunately, people go through this. And not everyone can take this experience and then
Turn it
into something.
Yep.
And that's okay. And that's okay. For whatever reason, I was built to be able to take this and share the story. And so it started with my blog when Will was sick. And I realized that so many people needed to hear vulnerability. They needed to hear what it feels like to be a mom and be scared. Mm-hmm. They needed to hear what it's like for a family to go through this. And they needed to hear that it doesn't mean that what they're going through isn't as important, but that if you can just continue to step into it, you will get through it.
The power of a voice.
That's right. Yeah. And so that was one of the ways in which Will was very impactful. He allowed me to share his story.
So I'm going to give you a plug. What website can we donate at?
So, yes, donations.
Yes.
Okay, donations is where it's at. And oftentimes people will say, what can I do? And it truly is, donations are the fuel so that I can then decide with my team where we should invest that money. Because, again, this is really impactful for researchers. And I choose to focus on Children's Hospital Colorado because they are doing amazing work there. And, discoveries can happen in any lab across this country. So why not children's, right?
Yeah, why not?
And so philanthropy is what makes the wheels go round, and donations allow me to be very impactful. So donations, thank you for asking. Yes, of course. Donations, www, of course. And the website for Will Strong is willstrongcancerfoundation.org. So all one word, lowercase, Will Strong.
Say it one time.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's a tongue twister. willstrongcancerfoundation.org. And we have a website. We collect donations. We are always looking for community partners who would like to get involved and support us and work in tandem because, again, more power with more collective people coming together to do this. Ultimately, and I can tell you this, as a mother whose son went through horrific treatments and whose son is no longer here because of a lack of research, at the end of the day, research is the most important thing, in my opinion, to focus on. There are other ways to support, and they're very important. And we hope through Will Strong to also begin to roll out more of a psychosocial support program. But right now, really eye on the prize of research and funding for a cure or at least a better treatment, right? And so we're always looking for people who want to get involved, whether it's a volunteer, maybe there's time and talent, maybe there's resource, whatever it is. And I'm really committed to continuing to grow this and make a difference, keeping Will's memory alive, but also really it's become so much bigger than that. And it's just one little thing that I can do to make a difference in this world on behalf of my son.
And on behalf of my family, thank you for Will and you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Me too.